DevelopSec, Developing Security Awareness with James Jardine, brought to you by Jardine Software. Hi, and welcome to episode 27 of the DevelopSec podcast. I am your host, James Jardine. And last episode, we talked a little bit about how QA plays an important role in the security of our applications. In this episode, I really want to take a moment to start focusing on the other side of development, right? The pre-development, where we're looking at business analysts, we're looking at product managers, product owners. These people play a critical role when we're talking about the security of our application because they're helping define and shape what our application is. They're working with the end users on what do you need? What is the functionality that's required to perform your task? And so thinking about that and thinking about how we can change the way we look at building these requirements can have this domino effect from pre-development through development and then into QA and out the door. So typically what we've done from a business analyst perspective, right? We build use cases, we build user models. We have all these different ways, right? These stories that we're going to build up to describe how this application should work and the functionality that should exist. That way we can ensure that the users are able to do what they need to do. Traditionally, we look at it strictly from the idea of, here's the functionality I need. Let's make sure that that functionality works, right? An example, I want to make sure that, say I'm creating a bank account. I create it. I know that I have a few requirements. One, I have to be able to log into the system, and I have to be able to view my account. Right? And of course, there's other systems, functionality that we're going to have out there. We're going to have the ability to transfer money. We can maybe take pictures of our checks, right? We've come a long way with internet banking. Take pictures of our checks and be able to deposit checks that way instead of having to go to the bank, right? There's these functionality pieces that are sitting out there, but let's keep it simple. I can log in, I can view my account. So that's pretty simple to come up with some requirements for that, right? I mean, heck, I've worked in a lot of development shops. Those requirements would be written on a napkin someplace. If you're fortunate enough to actually have a pretty decent business analyst and you're actually getting nice requirements that are being provided to you, there may be more than that, right? There may be screenshots of what each form should look like. Here's what the authentication form should look like. Here's what your balance should look like when you view it on the screen. Here's the fields that you're required to have. But oftentimes we don't get real in-depth of the exactness of those fields. And that's one area where we can improve upon. But also, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, but also we have this issue that right now we just describe it as, look, I want to be able to log in, click view account, and my account appears, right? And in a lot of places, that's a successful test, right? If I throw some crazy information in there, it might throw me an error message back or something like that. But in its simplest form, I want to log in, view my account information. So oftentimes, from an attacker standpoint, right? I mean, that type of system, I want to figure out how can I log in and view somebody else's account? Do I have that ability to view my neighbor's account or, just any other account holder's information out there, right? Now, when we go back to the traditional sense of, look, here's what the business requirement is. I can log in, I can view my account. We don't cover the what else can I do? And as we start really changing our focus, it's not changing the way we think. It's just modifying our vision just a little bit to say, not only am I going to define the requirements of how it should work from this is how I obtain my goals, but also how does the application work if I'm trying to do these other things, right? And it's fairly common now. Some of these things are, I want to try to view somebody else's account. I want to try to put malicious data into the system. I want to do X, Y, and Z. So if we start thinking from a business perspective, hey, I've got anything that has an account, right? Most of our systems have accounts. Let's really think about our authorization, the roles that we have, who has access to what. So now if I start building a user story that says, I need to be able to view my account, this happens, right? I click view account, I see my account details. If I attempt to view another user's account, what happens? Well, I should be responded back with like a 404, or, a 401 or 403, right, saying that we're unauthorized. You could get a 404 saying the page isn't there, but most likely we're going to get some sort of authorization issue coming back. Hey, you don't have access to that account, or even better is that account can't be found. Right now, you're not giving away what are valid accounts and which ones aren't. You just generically say, look, if I can't pull your account, the response is that account can't be found. So now, once we start doing that, right now we've got a record of it. We've got a user story that says, if I try to view another user's account, do this. So now I get to development phase. Developers see that and they say, oh, here's one of my stories. If I try to access a different account, this is what should happen. So I'm consciously thinking and being proactive about ensuring that I test that functionality out and I ensure that my authorization's working. Domino that out to QA. QA now has another story to build test cases upon, where we know it's not just this QA engineer believes that we should test for this, right? It's not a random thing. It's we've defined requirements, and that's a requirement for our site, is that if I try to view another user's account, this is what happens, right? And so now you're cutting down the ways that attackers can attack our sites. We're already predicting the ways in which attackers abuse sites, so we can go ahead and take care of that ahead of time and say, that's just part of our requirements. If somebody tries to view another account, this is what's going to happen. And we take care of it ahead of time. That's a huge help, right? As we start reducing this risk level and the surface area for attack and start cutting these paths off as we go, there's less and less for the attackers to attack, right? So now you're either getting more sophisticated attacks or, you're getting less attacks overall, which is where we want to get with this. The other side to that is getting better at defining our inputs that we have into our systems, right? We always talk, especially when we talk about injection attacks, right? We have to have inputs for it. I can't SQL inject your site if there's no place your site accepts data. We need to know, what are those valid inputs? If there's an account number field, what's a valid account number? Is it 2 characters divided followed by a hash, or a dash followed by 8 digits? Maybe that's the valid one. Maybe, we're in the Stone Age here and it's a social security number and there's a specific pattern. Maybe, don't do that though, right? I mean, we're not supposed to use those as identifiers. Maybe it's some other value that we're using. But let's really think about that and nail it down. Don't just send to the developer, hey, we have an account number. And so then the developer creates an account number field. It's kind of whatever they want. It's a lot harder to do input validation and limit down what is valid input and block the malicious input when it's more of that free form field, right? So if we're defining, saying, hey, this is a date. Birth date's a good example. Hey, we need to put a birth date in here. Okay, well, can that birth date be in the future? Well, no, we don't want that, right? That should be something that's defined if it's not allowed. Can that birth date be before 1900? We're only trying to pick people that are alive here, and we don't think anybody's going to have a birth date past 1900. What are the constraints to our input? Because as we start defining those more specifically, then when we get to development, we can actually do better input validation, which is half of the battle with our injection attacks. When we get to QA, we have more strict guidelines to the input validation. So that means we can write better tests to have better validation that the input coming in is the input we want, and we're getting rid of that other stuff. Is there a chance bad stuff can still get through? Yes. Is there a chance that if I write functional requirements that say, hey, if I try to access somebody else's account, throw an error page or return this message, that there's no way somebody can access somebody else's account? I mean, there still may be a chance, right? Security's not 100%. It'll never be 100%. But the more we do, the better we'll start to get at it, right? And then we can start saying, hey, look, we're doing our due diligence here. We're doing this. We've adapted and said, look, we're not just going to look at what does the app need to do, but in addition to what does it need to do, what does it need to do if I try to do these common things, right? And we're not trying to write for every possible combination of stuff out there, but we want to protect ourselves from the big things that are the common things people are doing. I can't tell you how many times I test sites and we don't have hardly any issue at all viewing into the user's account by putting it into an ID field in the URL or something very simple like that. So the more we can start identifying these, the quicker it'll be. I know when you first start doing it, right, this is something that's going to seem like it's time consuming, it's difficult, it's adding all this overhead, but quite honestly, most of these stories really are going to carry over from application to application, right? I mean, the idea of, hey, what happens when I try to go from this user to that user? That's very similar. You could have 50 apps. As long as they all have roles, that's going to be a very similar story. So you're not rewriting it every time, right? Build a library of these things where you're saying, hey, I'm doing authorization. Let's make sure that I've also got these extra stories on here that I'm making sure the developers are aware of and I'm making sure the QA is thinking of, so they're testing this stuff, right? It becomes this team system where we start building this, right? It gets into that whole, we've got DevOps, we got SecOps, we got all these different ops going on. We've got a lot of people, especially in DevOps, right? A lot about collaboration. It's a lot about automating some of the security testing we're doing. And again, maybe that ties into it, but the more we start thinking about it, the better we're going to be, right? And the more we start internalizing it within our software development teams, and that's not developers, that's everybody involved with the software development process. The more we start building that in, the less reliant we are on external security groups, right? Now, all of a sudden, we're using external security. They're coming in and they're testing. They're reviewing some of the stuff to make sure we're on par for what we're doing. But every time we do one of these reviews, we're picking up anything new that they're bringing in. We're immediately implementing that. And now really they're just kind of that outside, hey, there's something new on the list. But every time I'm coming in looking at your app, you're doing everything great. Yeah, we find a little bit of here and there, but you guys are doing great. I don't have to sit in every one of your meetings to determine if you guys are doing this right? Because you're starting to think a little bit more out of the, here's what my app should do. Here are other things that may be possible with my app. Let's make sure that we're cutting that off before we get to it. So I'm actually starting a whole series talking about a lot of this stuff and integrating the business, the developers, the QA, getting everything meshing really well so that way we're doing this stuff on a regular basis. And I think it'll lead to better security. I think you'll see better security coming out of it without the overhead of having to have external groups that you may be waiting on or they're waiting on you. Let's actually start embedding this in. Let's make it part of our process. Let's redefine what we call quality software and, make it everything we can make it be. So that's just a quick summary of where I see the business analysts and project managers sitting in with security roles. And obviously there's a lot more to that than just what I've mentioned here. I do have a quick blog post about it that covers a lot of the same out on https www.developsec.com. I'll put a link to it in the show notes so you can link out. I might actually update that post too for a link to the podcast so you can link either way to help you out. As always, if you have ideas or thoughts, please feel free to write out. I actually do have a Google Plus page now for the DevelopSec. I'll get that link up there. You can also reach me on Twitter at DevelopSec, as well as email me, james@jardinesoftware.com or podcast@developsec.com. For any ideas, any thoughts. I really want to help make security part of what we're doing. I don't want it to be such a, it's security, it's this, it's security. It doesn't have to be so different, right? We don't have to manage everything separately. We don't have to think of it separately. It's just part of what we're doing. And the more we start doing that, the more secure our applications will be, and we'll be doing our part, right? As developers, we'll be doing our part of creating quality software, and then we can let security worry about all the phishing attacks and network attacks and all this other stuff that's going on that is somewhat out of our control, right? If we're solving our problems, that helps reduce some of those. But let's see what we can do on our end to start fixing some of this stuff. So that's episode 27, and we'll get a few more episodes out shortly. I'm glad. Thank you for listening. Again, if you have any questions, comments, anything like that, feel free to send them my way. Always looking forward to seeing it. Looking forward to hear people, if they're listening, they enjoy it, the content makes sense. If you disagree, again, feel free, let me know. I'm a firm believer that without a good, healthy debate on topics, there's no way to flesh them out to get the best information. I can say what I think. Other people can say what they think. If there's disagreements, right, let's talk about it. We can sway either way. I can be swayed with the right amount of information. But, I'm giving the best information I think I can at the time. And the more conversation I get from people, especially developers, QA, business analysts, this is really directed towards you guys. So please pass this along if you know other people that are looking for this information. Share the information. And again, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. You have been listening to the DevelopSec podcast with James Jardine. Follow us on Twitter at DevelopSec and visit our website at www.developsec.com for more episodes and information.